Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Spinetinglers book series. And it's book 27, Lizard People. Now, off the bat, this book was kind of all over the place for me. I actually read this a few days, or maybe a week or two ago. And I got busy and I needed some spare time to get to this review, and I'm finally getting into it now. I'm glad I waited because after thinking about it, I was going to be initially way harsher than I was on this. But thinking over it, I do think that this book has some commemorable things about it, and you'll hear those things in the review portion of this video. But in case you haven't heard of the Spinetinglers book series, I've mentioned this in the past, that as a kid, this was definitely my favorite Goosebumps knockoff series. And most of these Goosebumps knockoffs that you'll come across on like YouTube or doing searches in the kids horror subgenre come from the 90s. And Spinetinglers ran 30 books, which was definitely not common to hit back then. So the series is definitely one of the more longer running ones in the subgenre, aside from like Goosebumps, that definitely outproduced a lot of the knockoffs tenfold. But the series is coined by a pen name author known as Empty Coffin, which is a play on empty coffins. And I get a kick out of that every time I make a review of one of these books. And each book in the series is ghost written by a different author. And this book is written by Jim DeFelice. And he wrote a few books. I think I've already covered one called Camp Crocodile, which I really enjoyed. If he has written another one that I've covered, it's kind of fleeing my memory. But this book, spoiler alert, is not as good as Camp Crocodile, but it's still pretty solid. And a fun fact about this book in particular, Lizard People here, it says contest winner announced on the book. Now, I don't know much about the Spinetinglers contest, but I do know that the winner of this contest was Michael Roglitz, who actually had his name used as the main character in this book. And to my knowledge, I think Michael had to submit like a story idea, and I'm not too sure if the story idea was picked up and turned into this book. That'll be fun to kind of learn and ask Michael Roglitz in like an interview. I think Jude DeLuca would be a good person for that, now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, this is the book that resulted from the Spinetinglers contest, and it happened later on in the series, of course. So a fun fact about that. And off the bat, is this like a good book to recommend for all you out there in case you haven't read a Spinetinglers book before, or maybe you're interested in trying the series and you come across this book at like a used bookstore or a thrift store or whatever? Sure, go ahead and pick this up and try it. I think it definitely has a lot of the hallmarks of the Spinetinglers series that you'll come to notice in most of the books. But I do think that it's a good starting position because you're not starting with like one of the best books, but you can get a sense of what the series is about and its weird ideas that you just can't find in Goosebumps. So that, with that out the way, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off with the main character, Michael Roglitz, who is playing in this cul-de-sac in his town called Pleasantville. And his town goes back to a few years after the Civil War, where this founder had founded the town. And it's kind of like out in the Midwest, so it's small, sparsely populated. And the kids don't really have much to do except play outside, because back in the 90s, that's what kids did. And him and his friends are throwing a football in this cul-de-sac. And the ball ends up in this yard of this house at the very end, where there's like no trespassing signs, trespassers will be prosecuted and all that. And Michael realizes that he has to go get the ball from the lawn of this house, which is like a brand new built house that hasn't been sold at all. And his friends are kind of daring him to go there because they think that the house is haunted, supposedly by local legend. So Michael, takes the dare. He goes to retrieve the football, and he decides to one-up his friends even better to prove that he's not scared to get it. He said, I'll even go inside the house to show you that the house isn't haunted. So Michael decides to, enter the front door. And when the front door closes behind him, he ends up getting pretty much transported into an alternate dimension. And this happens early on in the book, so this is not a spoiler by any means. And the way it's described is like, it even references Wizard of Oz when Dorothy's house is like twirling around in the tornado. That's how it is in Michael's mind, witnessing all this. And he blacks out. When he wakes up, he's still inside the house and everything seems normal. And he decides to, go outside and tell his friends about what just happened and if they saw anything weird. But he notices like there's no animals around, like no birds. And it's kind of uncharacteristic for Pleasantville, right? So he's wandering around. He doesn't see his friends anywhere. And he goes to a nearby house. And when he knocks on the door, a woman answers. But when the woman answers, she has a lizard head with a human body. And this freaks Michael out, and he starts running. This alerts a few people in the area. Apparently, in this place that he's in, the house that, he entered on the cul-de-sac from where he's from, had tripped off some sensors. And these, military uniformed or police officer type of people of sorts are trying to chase him down. And Michael's pretty much on the run for the remainder of the first half of the book. So he's like trying to hide. There's some tense scenes where he's trying to hide in some bushes, overhearing these lizard men looking for him. And he ends up wandering into this area, kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's called the neutral zone between two districts. We'll get into that in a minute. But let's just say he's in this area known as the neutral zone, and he ends up befriending this older lizard man named Sam. And Sam kind of takes him under his wing, and he reveals that he's like a hobo, and he doesn't really talk to much people, and it's nice to have, Michael in his company. And Michael realizes very quick, and he's trying to stress that he's different, and Sam's like, well, I don't doubt that you're different, but best of luck to you, whatever. So Michael is going on this journey, he realizes, after seeing his reflection in like a nearby pond and, getting to look at himself, that he himself has been turned into a lizard. Like, he has the body of a human, but he has a lizard head. And all these food options that, that he sees people eating or hearing about is weird. Like, there's a scene where he ends up like eating something, and he realizes that it's made of dog meat, and he thought it was chicken. Yes, there is animal cruelty by eating animals like dogs in this. So if you're not expecting that, be fair warned going into this book. But it comes to a point after he meets up with this homeless lizard named Sam, where he's trying to evade the cops, right? And he ends up pretty much getting arrested by a kind police officer that's looking out for his best interests, telling him that, hey, we're just going to take you into this holding tank, and then the next day you're going to be released back into the neutral zone, unless you have family. So Michael, he realizes that he has his human IDs on him and human photos, which actually still have his human face and his real life sister and his parents. And he's like, maybe I should tell the authorities who I really am. So when he gets, into the station, into the holding area, he gives them information that says, hey, my name's Michael. And he gives his last name. And they're like, oh, so are you by any relation to this person who, has similar spelling to his name, like his last name, but there's a different name change with like one letter, like the O in Roglitz would be like U, like Ruglitz. And he talks that up to just how the language is spoken in this new world, because in this new world, the police cars say police with like a Z instead of a C in the word police. So he's like, yeah, that must be my relative, equivalent in this universe. So he gets put into the holding tank, waiting on, the police to reach out to his family. And he ends up getting a person thrown into his holding tank, which ends up being Sam. And Sam tells him that he got himself pretty much purposefully arrested so he can come talk to Michael. And Sam pretty much info dumps on Michael that he was once a human and he ended up into this parallel dimension a long time ago on the opposite side of the country, because Michael lives in Florida and Sam got transported in a cave in like New Mexico. And the time he got transported was back during the Great Depression in the 1930s. He's given backstory how he was a scientist at Princeton. They're looking for, interstellar travel. He ends up in New Mexico after losing his job during the Depression, falls asleep in a cave, and suddenly he's transported. And he gives this idea to Michael that there are parallel doorways that coincide throughout the universe that act as portals to gain. So not only did Sam discover the natural Earth portal to the land of the lizards, he insinuates that Michael must have come across the lizards portal to the Earth, which is via the house, which plays a role later on in the story. So Michael takes that information and he's like, okay, good to know that. So there is a possible way to get back home through the house, because where he's at in this new lizard world, it's pretty much the equivalent to his town Pleasantville, except this one is known as, I think, Swampville. So his family equivalent come and pick him up, say that, hey, our kid has been missing around the same time that Michael had arrived in the lizard dimension, and this kid must be, their son. So they take Michael home with them, and Michael's like, okay, well, this isn't too bad. I'll play along, be their son, and try to find a way back to get home. But when he gets there, his lizard parents kind of reveal that they already know that this Michael isn't their real son. And they explain that his eye color is blue, and the real son's eye color is red. And that was the dead giveaway. But they also believe that because they realize that this kid sounds like their son, and they, kind of buy his story, that it doesn't matter if he can never find his way back home, they're going to take him in like their own kid. And Michael really files that in the back of his brain. He gets emotional about it, and he's like, wow, I wish that my parents would do the same thing if the roles were reversed. And he takes that very seriously. So unfortunately, that good moment gets broken up because the police come back to rearrest Michael, because they realize that the eye color did not match up to the missing kid description, and he gets taken back from the police to have his hearing with this judge, and this judge essentially sentences him to death. And I'm not playing, because they think that he is a liability, and if he is what he says he is, he's a threat to this new dimension, right? Well, before he can be sent to be executed, essentially, he's rescued by his good friend Sam and the Good Samaritan police officer that tried to help him out earlier. And they pretty much make a break for it, driving through town. They drive through this mall, and all the buildings in town, I should already mention this, but I will here, they are built out of like very thin metal, so they're very easy to penetrate and break down. So they cut through all these buildings. They reach the neutral zone to try to get to this cul-de-sac house that's in the neutral zone so they can send Michael home. And Michael is kind of taken aback because his, would-be adoptive family, if he would stay in the lizard dimension, is helping him reach the house. He has the Good Samaritan police officer, his friend Sam, trying to do this. But they get into a nasty car accident, which allows the authorities to catch up with him. And Michael kind of blacks out. Before, he knows it, he wakes up, and he's in like a hospital room where the judge and all these police officers are. And they pretty much drop a bombshell on Michael that the house is the portal to multiple dimensions and universes. And because Michael has said that he comes from this one dimension, that they feel like they need to close the portal forever, and that if he never tried to escape, his execution was simply going to be taking him back to the house and, shipping him back to where he came from. But since he destroyed property and has all these allegiances, and is breaking like lizard code of law, he now really has to be put to death. So he has to undergo that, and he gets saved again by his good friend Sam, and some other cohorts, and he ends up back into the house, and he realizes that once he's back in the house, he has to figure out how he activated the portal to begin with. He realizes what mechanism it is, and he may or may not end back up to where he came from. And when he does that, he kind of realizes that there are some parallels that might be left over from the lizard world that he was just in, and there might be some unanswered questions involving a certain character that went missing in the story that leaves the story open-ended, but in a lighthearted way, I would say. And that is essentially what you'll expect out of Lizard People. So, yeah, this is a pretty solid book. Off the bat, my immediate positives with the story is that I think, for a book that's written in third person, I should have mentioned that, but for a third person book, I do feel that Michael was written in kind of like a bland way, but over time in the story, you get a sense of Michael's personality and how he's just like an average kid, but he has a big heart, and he's very good at making friends, and he's very good at, thinking through consequences and stuff. And I really enjoyed Michael's character development throughout the book, and especially where the ending leaves off with this character. I like that he contemplates what he does, because that kind of showed the point in the lesson that he learned throughout the book. And honestly, that lesson is pretty universal. I mean, it starts off as being, you need to obey laws, right? There's reasons why, trespassing signs are on buildings and stuff, and that could be just, something that you can glance over. But once you're thrown into a situation and you're actually being hunted down for what you did, because people know that you did it, it raises the stakes, and it actually puts, your future life in jeopardy. And the morality is basically, at least what Dave Felice was trying to get across in the book, is that you should obey laws and obey social constructions because they're there for a purpose. And some people might disagree with that message. It depends. But I think it makes sense for what it's trying to be. And honestly, there's some really fun side characters like Sam, the homeless lizard man. He's a great character. He legit puts his life on the line to help save Michael. I mean, very noble character. Honestly, I like the lizard parents that take Michael in, knowing that he's not their real son, but they're doing it to do the right thing. I mean, it's very wholesome. I mean, you can get behind these characters. Even the villains of the book, the corrupt judge and the corrupt police officers, they info dump pretty much all the connections to be made from the first half that really didn't make sense, which is good for the plot, but they also are pretty evil. They're willing to cover up their own butts and do something to Michael and cut off the connection that's his only way home. And that's very ruthless to do. Really no bad characters in this book, I would say, which is a good thing. I think, in terms of Prouse and, atmosphere writing, imagery, I think Dave Felice in his own ways, even though it can be kind of choppy, which is a mild negative, he does try to paint these chase sequences in a vivid way. He does try to paint these locations that Michael finds himself in a descriptive way, and I really appreciated that. And because of that, it was kind of rich in atmosphere in some places. You got a sense of what this lizard world kind of looked like. So yeah, And honestly, I dig the concept behind it, getting transported into an alternate world that kind of mirrors your own, but has subtle changes, and the body horror that could be had with that, which plays into, the lizard head stuff. And, while you would think that that would be the best horror to get from the book, honestly, the best horror is from the tense scenes that Michael found himself in, whether we're talking trying to hide from the police, trying to hold his breath, and how tense that was, or when he's in a high-speed car chase in that car accident scene, or when he's dealing with the judge trying to pretty much have him executed. This stuff is like pretty hard-hitting stuff for a kid to, try to fathom in their brain. So I can appreciate that. Now, my negatives, there are some pretty heavy ones, though, if I'm being honest, y'all. And it's sad, but the first thing I should mention here is that the first half of the book is very sluggish. The way the story trots along, you don't really get a sense of how any of this connects or makes any sort of sense whatsoever, like with the house, randomly spinning and ending up in a different dimension. You don't know why that's happening, and it's chase scenes until you get to the, Sam character in the mid portion of the book. The first half is a slog. You can't really make much sense of what's going on. You don't really get a full-on sense of what Michael's character really is until the back half of the book. And I think if the first half was as strong as the second half, this would have been a way better read. Yeah, but the first half, not that great, if I'm being honest. The second thing I want to bring up are some inconsistencies in the story, some unexplained things. There are a lot of explanations and the connections of how this house operates and how it gets them to certain dimensions. But one thing that's never explained in the story, but is heavily insinuated, is that when Michael travels to the lizard dimension, his counterpart somehow gets transported back to Earth. But it's never actually said that that happened, but it's implied. And if that was the case, then there's something involving the ending with that leaves it open-ended, and it just makes no sense if he went back, potentially, wouldn't his counterpart get taken back to where he came from? A lot of it makes no sense. It just feels put in there just to have an additional ability of the house and the transportation technology, and that's just kind of bogus to me. And also, how does Michael's appearance change from human to lizard is never explained at all. So that stuff just gets mulled over, unfortunately, and that is another negative I have with it. And the third thing, this is a common thing with most Spinetinglers books, but in this book, like I said, I've already brought it up, it's a mild negative, but it's, Dave Felice trying to do Prouse. It's very all over the place. He has these paragraphs, right, where he's just paragraph dumping Prouse, which is good to have. At least there is some there, but some of it feels like it's filler, like page filler to, boost up page count of the book. Some of it feels unnecessary. There's also some repetitive sentences where he's kind of repeating what he's saying in the first part of the sentence and the back part of the sentence, which I found kind of odd. There's also some weird ways he handles dialogue in here that, I see throughout the kids' horror subgenre, but he does it so many times. I had to reread a few sentences quite a few times while reading this book because I'm like, what were you trying to say with this dialogue here? Because the way he structured that. Sentence structure, paragraph transitions, technical writing stuff, just was kind of jarring to me. But I'm not going to be the biggest stickler on that because at least the concept was there and at least the story was there. I'm not one to just beat up a book and give it a 1 star because you can't get behind the writing of it. There's some people out there willing to do that to some books. I'm not one. That's why it's not that big of an issue, but it is one. With that being said, though, from a 0 to 5 star basis, I thought this was a fun little read. Not the greatest thing ever. I wouldn't even say it's very good at all. So it's getting at least lower than a 4 out of 5 stars. And where I decided was, I think this book is good to fine. or fine to good. So I was leaning towards 3.5 to 3.9. And where I settled with this might be kind of low for some people that have read this book, or maybe high. It depends on if you just couldn't get behind the first half of the book and it just took you out of it with the writing. I could totally see that. But I'm willing to give this thing like a conservative 3.5 out of 5 stars. I deducted 1.5 points off altogether for those issues I mentioned. And really it comes down to, connecting, certain things that happen with Michael turning into a lizard and how his alternate is transferred to where he's from, how that stuff's just mulled over. And, trying to, quantify how much to take off for, sentence structures and all that plays a part into it. And then the other negative I have, which is kind of escaping my brain, but I've already mentioned it. But nonetheless, I think like a 3.5 out of 5 is perfectly fair for this. It's a lower end of good. It's like a C minus, but I categorize a 3.5 as just a fine book. It's a fine, recommendable read for people to go check out. It's not, like I said, I don't want to get your hopes up too high for this. Most people probably will be around where I'm at with it in the fine category. So, I feel justified by placing it here, I feel. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Lizard People. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book before. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.